My name is Henry. I was 10 at the time when this happened. I was tall for my age, standing at about 5 feet. This will be significant later. I had 2 friends who lived across the street. One was 13, we will call him Caden, and the other was 12, we will call him Tatum. Being the youngest, I was the smallest and wasn't believed when making a claim. But that evening, they began to feel my claims in a more serious light. I live in rural Kentucky. That evening, we decided to head to a nearby abandoned barn on a small farm. This was soon one of the worst nights of my existence. We jumped the fence and strolled into the woods. This is the point where I felt a slight urge to run the other way. But I figured it was just the ambient feeling of being in the woods. The feeling left when we hit the clearing where the ominous barn and its surrounding tool shed were. We ran into the barn to avoid being seen by the property owner. We noticed 5 chests stacked on top of each other as we entered the barn. 4 of them were locked with giant industrial locks. I saw the top one was unlocked, so I opened it. But before I did, we had to talk about it, and we determined what's the worst that could happen. It would be fine. Boy, were we wrong. We all opened it at the same time because it was heavy. It was at this moment that everything went wrong. The box contained feathers that looked like human hair and bone. The barn began to creak and groan. There was a small black cat that resided in the barn. We heard it screaming outside. We looked into the shed, and that's when we saw it. A 10-foot-tall, dusty brown man in what only I could describe as a gas mask. It had a balloon in one hand and a bat in the other. It looked malnourished, as if skinny, with dirty clothes that would peel off at any second. It never moved a centimeter. We all froze. The dread intensified. The barn shook on its boards, and honestly, we counted from 3 and we all ran. The thing never moved. It never chased us, but the dread follows me to this day. I still wonder what that thing was, and what was in the other 4 chests. I was going into my senior year in high school. The summer was not quite over yet, and I had a before, and it was back to tedious task all day. I had a few hours to burn waiting for a girl I was seeing to get back from a party. It was somewhere around 11 at night. I decided to drive back to an old spot in the woods about 20 minutes from the girl's house. This had been a spot where my great-uncle had taken me fishing as a kid. Since his passing 2 years prior, I have only been out to this spot a few times. In the lake sat an old cemetery with graves marked from the 1700s. George Washington's drummer happened to be buried at the foot of the lake. Other graves marked the passing of entire families from diseases like typhoid fever. Some graves were not legible after centuries of weathering. This place always had a distinct feeling to it. It was often hushed and felt desolate. As my friends would say, I'm a crazy guy, so I decided to take my green Tacoma out on the road alone in the middle of the night. I had my truck rigged for off-roading, so the long drive on a gravel road heading for the spot was no problem. Potholes and sharp turns usually keep too many guests out of this area. Tucked behind miles of woods was a cemetery overlooking an old reservoir used for drinking water in many surrounding towns. The woods, they looked like they were in the middle of the wilderness here. Giant pines covered most of the shores of the crystal-clear lake. This was a pretty lonely spot, so I felt excited to get here and spend some time alone. I wanted to reminisce on old memories of catching big bass and spending days on the water with my great-uncle. This kind of adventure was typical for me. I would ride my bike 20 miles a day as a kid out to fishing spots in the middle of nowhere. I am pretty tough to shake. I'm not Iron Man by any means, but I'm also not scared of a twig snapping or something of that like. I've always been the kind of guy who would step in when things start to hit the fan and get things done. I've carried friends who have had broken legs with bones through the skin, rushed heart attack victims to the ER, and all sorts of gruesome stuff, but none of that really ever bothered me. Soon, this unshakable attitude would change. I decided to drive down to the lake's edge and sit with my windows down. The sounds of the frogs and crickets were the only sounds of the night. All was well. I checked the time out of good cell service and decided to head back. My road home started with a steep gravel road through the mountains. I put on my high beams to spot deer and climbed up the hill in my truck. I looked ahead at some trees, smaller in diameter and tightly packed together. They littered my view. A flash darting through the gaps in the trees caught my attention. I spotted what looked like a pale figure, no more than 4 feet tall if I had to guess. Very skinny and very fast. Still, miles away from the nearest house or gas station, the mood turned from a fun trip down memory lane to a feeling that I told myself I would never forget. I don't know what I saw. I didn't see any prominent features, but rather I just saw a pale, gray figure whipping between the trees at inhuman speeds. I am open-minded when it comes to cryptids now. I don't know what kind of cryptid this could have been, if any at all. I didn't want to stick around to find out though. My truck fishtailed as I peeled out down the gravel road, drifting every corner. I didn't realize I was crying until I exited the woods. If I can say anything, they're just horrifying. What was it that I saw? If anyone knows, please let me know in the comments. For my girlfriend's birthday, I took her to Gatlinburg, a popular, touristy, one-man boardwalk town in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. We camped the first night, a few miles out in the woods at a popular location called Elkmont Campground. The campground was beautiful. Tall green trees like baby redwoods. A clear water river scattered by checkered rocks. Families with little ones running around. Through borrowing a tent, we found that we had no stakes and headed into town for supplies. Whiskey and hot dogs. It was dusk by the time we made it back to the campground. Most campers were surrounding their dissipating fires, or cleaning up before the quickly approaching dark of night fell over us. Our tent was still not entirely set up, but rather crunched up without the stakes allowing it to spread open as widely as it could. We fixed our tent and started a fire. As our night progressed, we found ourselves surrounding our campfire 2 to 3 hours later around midnight. Now, this was the sort of campground where another campsite is just 30 yards from yours. Ferris frequented the area, and my girlfriend was already freaking out a little bit, which is why I booked our site in the dead center of the whole campground. All the other campers had gone to bed at this time, and the only sound we could hear was the slowing crackle of our fire and the light stream of river flowing into rocks. The clouds were covering a crescent moon, so there wasn't too much light to begin with. We had flashlights, and I would occasionally shine the light around us while avoiding hitting other campers to confirm that there was nobody around us, or no bears. Seemingly out of nowhere, from the campsite behind my girlfriend and to my left, a light shone directly on us, and then all around in a frantic yet focused manner, kind of like the Eye of Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. What appeared to be a man with the strangest gait I have ever seen wore a headlight and was focused on his picnic table. The man's gait seemed to be like that of Jar Jar Binks, just not normal. Through a peripheral stare of my own, the man focused his light on the picnic table, and whenever I turned my head toward him, immediately his light would be hitting my girlfriend and me. It's like he was looking straight at us from his peripheral as well. I could only see the outline of the man through the light of his headlight and the occasional flash of my light at his campsite. Once he continued to flash his light at ours in a very disconcerting way. This was the campsite across from us where we saw no one all night prior. I could only see the outline of his body, as all black was as if he was in a black bodysuit. His movements were eerily repetitious. For what went on close to an hour, this man would shine his headlight on his picnic table, make limited motions with his hands, if any at all, then walk 5 steps back to his tent, shine his headlight at his tent, walk back to the table, shine his light at us, then all over again. If this was just a man looking for something, he was on a cocktail of drugs. That's for sure. Once his light was on us for too long, that made me start to feel uncomfortable. I shined my flashlight on him for an extended time. It was at this moment when I went from annoyed to fight or flight. A chill ran down my back and I saw the outline of the man disappear in front of me. The light from his headlight bounced down to the ground, and then flew across the ground from his campsite and seemed to jump along the ground into the bushes diagonal from our campsite. not as if the headlight had been thrown, but as if he was running across the ground in all force. I took my flashlight away and watched his light slowly come back out of the bushes and climb back up into the height of a person. The shadow figure returned, walking out of the bushes and back to the campsite to continue with the odd behavior. There were no sounds at all coming from this figure through the entirety of the night. Some time later, we went into the tent for shut-eye, and the shadow figure was still in his odd routine. The following day, the tent from the Shadow Man's campsite was gone, like no one was ever there. I found out just a mile from the campsite, in a small town called Elkmont Ghost Town, with abandoned buildings and cemeteries and everything, that a lot of tragic stuff happened there. I don't know if I could really connect them together, but maybe there's something to it. I'm a big fan of horror stories. There's nothing better than sitting home on a cold, rainy day, listening to allegedly true horror stories, wrapped tight in a giant blanket, pretending to be a human burrito. But listening to these stories on Dark Spooks show and experiencing them is a road I never wish to cross again. I myself am an 18-year-old dude from a small country in Europe. I have a good body build from all those years in the gym and an excess amount of protein. I have lived my life in the biggest cities in my country, but I have never shied away from going to the countryside to get a bit of that countryman life. So, in the summer of 2019, I and two of my friends, Martin and a guy everybody called Wolf, decided to go binge drinking in a log cabin that was located some 35 miles from the nearest city. It doesn't seem that far, but none of us had driver's licenses at the time. So, at about 7 p.m., we hopped on a train and went to the woods, from where we had to walk about 3 miles to the glorious 2-story log cabin. Inside, on the ground floor, there was a kitchen and a bedroom. Upstairs, on the second floor, there was a small hallway which led to another bedroom with separate beds. I and Wolf established our presence in the second floor bedroom, and Martin settled down in the ground floor bedroom, like the little loner he is. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. We were prepping food and drinks, listening to music, never minding that we were in the middle of the woods, miles away from the nearest civilization, but we had lots of drinks and snacks. So what else would we need, am I right? About a half a mile away from the cabin, there was this massive pond. After a couple of beers, we went there, thinking we could go for a swim, but seeing the unnaturally dark water and a little forest of reeds, we decided that it probably was not worth getting rashes from the dirty water or cutting our legs on whatever litter might be roaming on the bottom, and we made our way back to the cabin. The evening was extraordinarily beautiful and peaceful. The red and purple sky was stunning, accompanied by the giant bonfire we made for the night full of marshmallow roasting and drinking. When the nighttime came, we were quick to drink, and it was about 1 a.m. We were all in a good state of drunkenness, some more than others because Martin was already passed out in his folding chair. Wolf and I carried him to his room and put him in his bed, leaving all the doors wide open. Everything outside was pitch black, and our smartass didn't bring a flashlight. But with one friend sleeping and us getting bored, we decided to walk back to that pond we went to previously and make a small campfire. But as we got near the trail that leads to the woods, we heard leaves crunching and twigs snapping, like somebody was quickly walking just behind the trees about 30 feet in front of us. We quickly stopped. Wolf whispered, "Hey, I think someone's there." "Can't be, it's a private territory, must be the wind or something," I said. Being quite drunk and actively brave, I loudly shouted, "If there's someone there, put your freaking hands up in the air." Yeah, very mature, I know. But then the sound stopped. It was as if whatever was making those sounds was never even there. Not being able to see because of the darkness, we got a bit creeped out and started to walk back towards the cabin, talking about how funny it would be if lifted their hands in the air after saying that. But what I heard then made my heart sink. From inside the cabin, we heard an ear-piercing scream. It was Martin. We rushed to the entrance of the cabin. Then we saw it. A pale, gray-skinned humanoid creature. It was probably about 5 feet tall with disproportionately long arms and webbed fingers. Its legs were bent backwards and super skinny. The face had two giant black eyes and a mouth that was open, showing a row of long, pointy teeth. The creature was holding Martin's leg while he was screaming inhumanly loud. I never thought a human could produce such a high-pitched scream. The thing had to run past us at some point and get out of the cabin. So I was scared and wanted to pee myself. We had to somehow get past this thing to get inside. Thinking quickly, we picked the biggest pieces of firewood and started throwing it at the creature. We both missed, but luckily it let go of Martin's leg and jumped back into the forest. We quickly dragged Martin back inside, closed all of the doors and windows, locking ourselves in the second-floor bedroom, backs pressed against the door. Martin's leg was pretty badly scratched. We poured vodka on the wound and DIY bandaged his leg. The rest of the night we heard scratching at the entrance and the windows. We were afraid it would break the windows and get inside, but to our luck, it never did. At one point, the scratching stopped, so Wolf went to the window and checked if it was gone. But to his horror, it was standing outside the window, looking straight at him. When the sun came up, we checked through all the windows for the creature. It looked like it was gone. We had to get out of the woods. After a couple of hours of being absolutely scared out of our mind, we finally grew a pair and started running as fast as we could. The journey to the train station was the longest of my entire life. I was afraid to see that creature again, but we managed to get home safe. We've never told anybody what we saw. I never really believed in those scary stories that I used to listen to either. The creature was similar looking to the Dover Demon, but not quite exactly. I still do not know why the creature didn't attack me and Wolf. Maybe it saw Martin as easy prey while he was in his drunken state, but I'm happy it all ended safely. I think the creature came from that pond. Those webbed hands indicate that the creature is semi-aquatic, so whether I'm right or wrong, I'm super glad that we didn't go for a swim there. Could have ended so much worse if it had.